Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name's Johnny Burtka, and I am the president of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. So just a show of hands, how many of you is it your first event here at ISI? Wow, okay, most of the room. Well, welcome. So ISI was founded in 1953, and our mission is really to identify, educate, and mentor college students, really giving them kind of the history, the culture of America, going all the way back throughout Western civilization, throughout Jerusalem, Rome, Athens, London, and Philadelphia, really giving them the foundation that they're not getting in the classroom, mentoring them, helping them to form friendships, and then playing a key role in launching their careers. So we have about 125 societies on college campuses, but we also have a network of 80 campus newspapers. So we build the websites, we train the journalists, and then we fund about 15 of them and get their foot in the door at a major media outlet when they graduate. So that's what we're up to at ISI. In terms of the ethos of the place, I really like to think that we embody the spirit of the Brandywine Valley. That is, on one side, we really value, entrepreneurship, innovation, kind of that whole history of industry and growth that goes back all the way to the DuPonts here in the Brandywine Valley. And then at the same time, we have an appreciation for culture, for the arts, for history, for good literature, and really for conserving the best of the Brandywine history and of American history, and really instilling those two principles into the next generation. So you're gathered here in the Linda L. Bean Center, and many of you probably had the opportunity to meet Linda at some point during her life. I am heartbroken to say that Linda actually passed away on March 23rd. So she was here to dedicate the building in September, but this is actually the first event that we've held since she passed, and it's a real shame because she actually had a special gift, a family heirloom, a ring that she wanted to present to Brian tonight, which she wasn't able to do, but we're still hoping to get that ring to him. But if we could just have a brief moment of silence to remember Linda and her family in your thoughts and in your prayers. Thank you. I'd also like to thank a supporter, Rich Bacigalupi, who flew in all the way on a red eye last night from Seattle. Rich is right here in front. So, Rich helped ISI to build out our media studio. So on the third floor of our current building, our headquarters, we now have the ISI media studio. And then this afternoon, Brian Kilmeade and I recorded the first video in a new series on statesmanship, and we'll be releasing these videos. There's going to be a dozen of them kind of exploring the art of statesmanship, and many more. Every time we have a great speaker who comes here to the Bean Center, we're going to pull them up to the studio and be filming content, really getting that out to college students. So thanks so much to Rich. In terms of tonight's event, this is really the inaugural event in a new series, the Stratus Foundation with Fly Advanced Brandywine Speaker Series. So this is going to be a quarterly series. You can all save the date for September 21st. It's a Saturday when we'll have our second event in this series. It'll be part of ISI's homecoming weekend. So we'll have 250 alums of ISI from around the country, over 100 students and professors. And as part of that weekend, the first panel will be George Will, who's a journalist, and Lord Conrad Black, who's another journalist, discussing and debating the legacies of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan and what they have to teach us today. So please mark your calendar for that event. All right, good. Seems like there's some excitement about that. But of course, the real reason we're here is thanks to the generosity of Regis de Rommel. And I actually met Regis at our gala and dedication in the fall, and we became fast friends. And he, his life has been marked by innovation, entrepreneurship, aviation, and a real sense of stewardship for his local community. There's a family tradition of aviation going all the way back to Frederick and Norman Prince. There's a whole rich story there that ties into World War II, which I could go into. But I really think that Regis embodies that Brandywine paradox that we're seeking to instill in our students. And of course, the Fly Advanced Group is a global leader in aviation management and charter services. And he actually, it's like his life is like a movie. He piloted a plane to Florida this morning and back And we were waiting for him to arrive from the airport, so he's made it. He's also a descendant of Montesquieu, the French philosopher, who, of course, the American founders revered, and so we cherish that here at ISI. So please join me in welcoming Régis, who will introduce tonight's keynote speaker.
So thank you all. And I'm really pleased to see so many people here. Of course, as Johnny said, I just literally landed. I jumped out of the plane, got into the car. Didn't think I was actually going to make it. But I'm just honored and privileged to be able to be part of this group and to get to know Johnny, to be able to introduce this series. I had hoped to download the book and listen to it on the flight down and then all the way back up. But as luck would have it, my Apple iPhone didn't download it. So I can't tell you much about the book. And you guys already know Brian. So without much ado, I'd like to bring Brian up here.
Thank you, John. Okay. How's it going? Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. If you're introduced by one name, you're either a great philosopher or a fantastic soccer player. So it's one or the other. Thanks so much for coming out. I'm truly thrilled to be here, to be invited to come down. It worked out for me because I was having lunch at the Bidens, and I said, you mind if I run out for a minute? And he said, no problem. And of course, he couldn't answer me right away. He had to see what note card he was on. And then he told me, no problem, you can go over there. And then he also said, I didn't know there was an ISI in the area. We're going to have to handle that. So, no, I'm thrilled to be here because I love history. I love the history of our country. And I didn't know how rare a commodity that would be. But that's where we're at. We're pushing back. We're making some progress. And what I've enjoyed doing most about the books, people say, Brian, it's easier to write the book than promote the book. You have to go out and travel the country. I like meeting people. I love the people that watch the channel, that listen to the radio show, because they care about the country. And they do it, whether they're in business, whether they're landscapers. Sometimes you just lose track of history. I took history, I took social studies. I don't really keep up with what's going on. I never really knew about it, bad teacher. It's okay. But if I'm able to go through my books and talk about America's past, not like I'm above them, but I'm one of them. Let people realize we're on the same team, and you should embrace our history, not just about your sports teams, about our country, and understand no matter what philosophy you're in, what you believe, who you vote for, we're in the same jersey. And if I could get people to look back instead of worry about what's happening now, number one, you get a perspective. The world's not coming apart. It's never been so bad is not a correct statement. It's one of these things that happens with great countries. After a while, when you're in first place for a long time, sometimes the locker room gets a little rough. Right now, the locker room's a little rough. And a lot of it's spent in the courtroom because of what other people are saying in the locker room, if you understand my analogy. So I've had a chance to go in the past and not do plowed ground. For example, we know about Washington, we know about Jefferson, we know about Jackson, we know about Sam Houston, you know about Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, but do you know how they're related to each other and the people around them that make our country great? And I think you agree with me. As great as our founding fathers were, our country's made up of everyday people, so-called everyday average people, doing extraordinary things, not for themselves to get famous, because they believe in the cause and the country. And if I could get some attention on that, I wanted to do it. So if coming up to Delaware and spending a couple hours with you guys, it's my privilege, especially to talk about these two guys, Teddy and Booker T. And that was the wrong direction. So there you go. Okay. I was a little bit too far ahead. Don't look. Okay. So this is how two men, in a time in which everyone's talking about George Floyd and how we're divided, I'd like to talk about a different time which we clearly were divided, with segregation and Jim Crow flourishing. These two men found a way to come together from very disparate lifestyles. And think about it, you couldn't be more different. So you have Booker T. Washington. You talk about a guy born in slavery who never knew who his father was, never had shoes, never had pants. He also remembers when Union soldiers came to his to the big house on the plantation, and they told everyone to come. And they made the announcement and read what he believes was the Emancipation Proclamation. He says, essentially, you're free. He looked at his mom and he said, she was crying, but she was happy. And next thing you know, they got back to the house and they said, well, what they thought was a house, they said, what do we do now? Well, she had a companion and they headed to West Virginia. All he wanted to do was get an education. All he had to do was he had to work in the mines. And in the mines was nothing but something that he would do from the age of 11 to 13. And he was claustrophobic. And it was hard to breathe. And him and his brother would show up. And all he'd say is, Mom, I got to learn how to read. So finally she said, here's a book. It's called the dictionary. And he would just read the dictionary. And then one day, coming home, he hears two kids his own age talking about, I'm quitting, I'm not doing this job anymore. What job is that? He said, working for this woman, she's a taskmaster. All she wants to do, whatever I do, it's not good enough. I goes, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, I work inside the house. So he went up and he talked to her, went back to his house, says, can I work for this woman? And it turns out all she wanted was things done right. And all Booker T. Washington wanted was to do things right and to learn. And when she realized how astute this kid was and how determined he was, she said, what do you need? He goes, I'd love to learn to read and write. She goes, I was a teacher. Her husband was the richest guy in the area, and she was alone all day, and she became his mentor. And he began to read, he began to write, and he learned how to walk. He learned how to keep his shoulders back, to keep his head straight, understood how to talk to people. Guys, she got rid of his dialect. So he wanted to go to the next place. And one day he's walking home and he hears two other people talking kind of loud. And he said, if you can get over to Hampton College in Virginia, they have to let you in. So he asked his parents, can I go? He had $20 in his pocket and he went. And it reminds me almost like, do you remember The Jerk when you walk outside your house and you just hitchhike? He walked outside, there's nowhere to go. And he just started walking in that direction. Ran out of money halfway, worked for people, got some more money, slept on the docks, got his way to Virginia. He showed up, he was a mess. And they looked at him and said, who you are? I don't know who you are, but you can't come in here. Came back the next day. He's described sleeping between breaks in the sidewalk. Came back the next day and the next day and the next day. Finally, he realized he wasn't getting in, so he started working again in the docks, and he started working very successfully. He cleaned himself up and he came back. And she said to him, you're you again. She goes, well, what do you want? She goes, right now, I have one opening, but first thing, I need my classroom cleaned. Well, guess who taught him how to clean the classroom? Guess who taught him how to clean the classroom better than anybody else? Everything he did was efficient. The dusting was perfect down to the nth degree. And he walks in, she goes, who helped you with that? She goes, I want to watch you do one. Next thing you know, they cleaned the whole school. She goes, you could be a janitor during the day, you could go to school at night. Booker T. Washington became the best student. He would go back and graduate. And then when he left for a while to become a teacher, they asked him to come back and teach the night school, then organize the night school. And his mentor was General Armstrong. And he mentions people, and he never mentions the color of their skin. I had to go back and look at pictures. General Armstrong was a Union hero. He ran Hampton College. He took a liking to this kid who would not be denied, unbelievably kind, unbelievably hardworking, extremely smart, and always wanted to learn. So General Armstrong said, I just got this note in Alabama that started this school. It's going to be named after the local town. It's Tuskegee, because you're the perfect one to run it. You're 24 years old. They said they wanted a white guy. He goes, I got a black guy, and he's going to be the best thing I ever did for you. He shows up. It's a torn-up shed and a dilapidated church. When he went to teach, there were holes in the roof, and the biggest guy would hold an umbrella over his head as he taught. He had 2 weeks to get class together. We got 36 people. Almost everyone in the class was older than him. And then he would grow it and grow it and grow it. And then he used the students. And he said, we're going to build this better. We're going to make it bigger. And why? He said, because we're going to learn a trade. Just because you're in school learning to read and write and to open up your mind, you always have to learn a skill. He says, white people in this area aren't willing to hire you yet. You have to be indispensable. So they would do it. And almost out of the page out of The Karate Kid, they would build the school, and then they'd work at night. They'd go to school at night, work during the day, or go into school during the day and work at night. Women were allowed too. They also learned to trade. They also got educated. They also became teachers. And what was his goal? To send those African-American kids into the town and become teachers and spread the word and change 200 years of perceptions of what white people thought about black people. And to hear Booker T. Washington say it was just phenomenal. He said, you have to understand, that these people were told for the longest time they were inferior. It's going to take them a while to understand we're not. Now think about that philosophy. Unbelievably mature, looking at the big view. And he also said, he found out early that a lot of people wanted to help. Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Samuel Huntington with the trains. Everybody saw this guy and the potential in Tuskegee and what they were doing, and they were pumping up thousands of students. They were graduating more than Harvard. And he saw what was happening. They wanted to help. And he could have went to the North and lived like a celebrity. He could have went to Europe and lived a very easy life, making money off of speeches. He says, no, I'm staying in the South. And in comes segregation, in comes Jim Crow. It's unbelievably difficult. But for the people that knew him, for the thousands that graduated, they were little by little changing the perception of blacks in America. And that's why I just can't get enough of Booker T. Washington and how much there is to learn from him, how much he wrote, and how much he wouldn't be denied. It also taught me something else about vision and desire. You know, we talk about Norman Vincent Peale, we talk about Anthony Robbins, we talk about Napoleon Hill, and talk about Think and Grow Rich. Booker T. Washington beat all of them to the punch because in his mind, he pictured himself successful. He would not be bothered by people that hated him. He says, I wouldn't hate anybody. I don't want to give them that energy because it takes too much time to hate somebody. I got too much to do. And I'll remember one joke that was related. It was in his book, so I know it's true. He said, and we're going to get to this, after a controversial dinner he had with Teddy Roosevelt at the White House, he's sitting by a train and a guy walks up to him and says, are you Booker T. Washington? It's a white guy. He's like, yes. Thought this was going to go wrong. He goes, you are one of the finest men in America. And he goes, sir, thank you very much, but I have to think it's President Roosevelt. He said, I used to think so until he invited you for dinner. And him and Teddy Roosevelt laughed at it, but know what he also said? I realized I can't help that guy. His words were, I have to let sleeping dogs lie. And I'm going to worry about people that I can change their mind and understand the next generation that's coming in. And the more I read it, the more you read about how tough things were for blacks in that time, I'm just in awe of what he did. So this is what led me to this moment. I started in sports as a sports guy with a passion for history and a fascination with news. So I did The Games Do Count. And why did I write that book? I did it because I wanted to be a great soccer player. And wait a second. Oh, I remember. I wasn't. And I played since I was 5. And all I talked about, I played 300 days a year. And I was an average Division II player. And the more people I talked to, they weren't Michael Jordan. They weren't Mike Tyson. They were people who did what they could, whether an injury, a lack of focus, unfortunate, maybe ability, whatever it is. But those moments help shape them. So I wanted to prove. People used to say to me, Brian, why do you care so much? A Division II team where the only people that show up for your games in college are your parents. I go, I don't know. That's how I keep score. And then I wonder, the games do count. They do, because what you learn how to overcome being benched by somebody saying that they're better than you, or you have to work harder and work smarter. And if you learn from life the things that don't go well, I think you benefit from it. In that book of 72 people, from Gerald Ford to Richard Nixon, the people that had passed away at the time, to George H.W. Bush, to George W. Bush, to John Kerry. I have everybody from every walk of life. And the people that passed away, I got their biographers, which led me to It's How You Play the Game. I wanted to prove that people like George Foreman and George Patton, no difference. Because Patton wanted to be a great football player. The problem is he was 135 pounds, and he was a linebacker. And he wanted to be great, and he didn't. And we found letters of him writing back to his future wife saying, what's wrong with me? Am I ever going to achieve anything in my life? And when I read that, I felt so hard. And I'm like, here Patton was doubting himself, the world's best general. But I would also assess this, that George Patton is the people's general. He could understand and know what it's like to go be a grunt and be in the mud and the grime and be with one of the guys, because he knew what it was like to sit on the bench and be an also-ran. I think that helped shape them. He was also an Olympian. And then I had this idea, and I saw Bill O'Reilly writing these books. And Bill O'Reilly was writing books about history, and I'm like, it's going to sell because it's Bill O'Reilly. And then I read it, and I said, well, Lincoln's assassination, killing Jesus, which, by the way, I hate to give away the ending in the title, but in that one, he also said this interesting thing. He goes, Killing Jesus is coming out. I got new stuff in it. I'm like, really? It's not in the Bible? I'm like, okay, Bill O'Reilly. Trump's King James. So So, but they were fantastic books. They got right to the point. They weren't written for the scholar. They were written for the average everyday American. I go, Bill, I got this one story. Have you ever heard of it? I go, George Washington's spies. What are you talking about? I go, it happened right where we live. I live in Massapequa, he lives in Manhasset. I go, for 3.5 years, they kept their secret it was top secret until 1930. No one could put it all together. What they did behind the scenes in the war, deliver the war, those weren't my words. Those are the words of George Washington himself. If we don't have the spy ring, we don't win the war. And I go, good, because I can't relate to George Washington's greatness. You read about it, he lives up to the hype. But what if I told you a farmer? What if I told you a longshoreman? What if I told you a printer, a grocery store owner, and a bar owner, all combined to learn the craft of spying with invisible ink and dead drops, all in the middle of a war? I went to the CIA, to their history department, to make sure that I've got the story, that I'm not so caught up in it that I'm writing something that didn't happen. And I walked into the history department at the CIA at Langley. A couple of things to keep in mind. When you get your background check, you also need your driver to get a background check, because I couldn't get it past the gate. So in a 100-degree day, I had to walk another 200 yards by myself. I get there, I'm soaked. And then I get there deep into the bowels of the history section of Langley and the CIA, and I'm going through, and right before I get to the history section, I see a gift shop. I just had to say, I go, don't blame yourself if you don't get much traffic here today. Who's going to the gift shop at the CIA if you can even pass a background check? But I digress. So I sat down there with him and I said, look, can you just tell me this spy ring, or this original spy ring that people talk about? And I go, can you tell me what you have? He goes, you tell me what you have. So I told him. And they got the books and they showed him. It's like, no, we talked about this, and William Casey did a lot of work on this, former CIA director. This is true. And I go, what do you got? He helped me out. So I was able to put together the pedestrian spy ring. And what they did was so extraordinary. You would find a British officer said, George Washington didn't outfight us, he outspied us. And I go, that's the American story. Average, everyday American people doing extraordinary things for a thought of what a country could be, defeating the world's superpower. That's your country. So I looked at this thing for 20 years before I had the guts to write the book. So I was done. And they said, Brian, the book is sold over 1 million copies. Last month, it went over 1 million copies. And they did a study. They asked people why they bought it. And it turns out it's because I'm cute. That's what this says, guys. I know you're thinking that. So I go, what else are you interested in? I go, well, I'm caught up in the war on terror. And every time someone talks about the war on terror, they talk about what Jefferson did in the Barbary Wars, which got me Thomas Jefferson and the Tripoli Pirates. And that is, you know about Jefferson, but you know about William Eaton? He was basically half The Rock, half Sylvester Stallone. This guy was a brilliant guy, knew 3 languages, was able to go 500 miles through the desert to take Derna and almost take Tripoli if they didn't cut a premature deal, and stand up to terrorism. While all of Europe paid tribute, paid ransom, America took them on. Part of the reason was we didn't have any money. And the other part of the reason was, well, we were able to adapt to it and said piracy and hostage taking is not going to work. But as long as we don't have any more problems with the Middle East, just kidding, we have a lot of problems in the Middle East. Then I went to the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson, the Miracle of New Orleans. If I told you James Monroe, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson would become president, you wouldn't be surprised. But if I told you that an orphan kid at 11 years old who would volunteer for the Revolutionary War, lose his family in that war, his mom would die right before the war ended, be an orphan, would emerge as a 2-time president, a general, a senator, a self-taught general, I should add, a congressman, a lawyer, and a judge. Only in America can that happen without a social safety net. Andrew Jackson, you need to know that story and the people that helped him, which brought me to the guy he mentored, which is Sam Houston, the Alamo Avengers. Sam Houston was on his path to greatness, got in his own way a few times. Turns out drinking a lot and fighting, not the best thing for your career. But he ended up coming out of it and leading us, Texas, to their freedom. I always wanted to talk about what happened after the Alamo. People in Texas get this every other year. They believe that is the only history. But what happened at the Battle of San Jacinto when a group of Americans rallied in 17 minutes defeated the Mexican army in Santa Ana, that's a story I think we had to know. Which brought me to the president and freedom fighter. In the middle of George Floyd, I didn't really relish talking about race in America. I couldn't do a better Lincoln story than all these great books. I couldn't do a better Frederick Douglass story than David Blight. But what if I talked about how they came together from the most extreme, extraordinary circumstances to lead America during the most vital time? And if there is one philosophy that comes through this book, that comes through when you study history, is America seems to get the right people at the right time when we need them the most. Can't figure it out, but it happens. The most unlikely places you can imagine. Part of that is Jackson, part of that is Houston, and my goodness, part of that is Frederick Douglass, as well as Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. Abject poverty Lincoln, 1 year of formal schooling, learns to read, learns to write, runs for office, loses most of the time, loses the Senate race that captures America's imagination, starts this new party. At the perfect time, the party splits enough for him to win with 45% of the vote and half the country not voting for him. He ends up being arguably our best president. And when I talk about a guy in Frederick Douglass, born in slavery, never knew his mom, never knew his dad, just determined to matter in life, got himself educated, overcame things I can't imagine. He reminds me of half Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, or a third Malcolm X, third Martin Luther King, and Muhammad Ali. He was provocative, he was direct, he was demanding, he was charming, he was charismatic, and the guy had a goal, inspirational. He ends up being his own editor, publisher, self-taught, charismatic speaker. I can't begin to tell you, can't get my head around what he overcame to be this impactful player, one of the greatest Americans ever, that had every reason to be angry at America, but all he wanted to do was make America better, because he knew it's our Constitution we weren't living up to. We didn't have a flawed Constitution, and he evolved to that, which brings me to Teddy and Booker T. Now, does anyone like the Rocky movies? What's the best thing about the Rocky movies, or one of the best things? One part leads to the next. So I love the way Sam Houston fought in the Creek War, Horseshoe Bend, and he fought under Andrew Jackson. I was able to pick up where that left off. And with Frederick Douglass and Booker T, I'm like, what do I do between Booker T and Teddy Roosevelt? What's the link? And it's pretty obvious. For Teddy Roosevelt, we found out that is him at 8 years old, and he's looking out over Broadway. Do you know who's coming through Broadway? Lincoln's body. And his dad says, Lincoln's assassination, something you got to remember. I want you there. And he brought him to his grandfather's house, and he's looking out. Lincoln was somebody who used to talk to the picture and statue of Lincoln. It would guide him the rest of his life. He actually envisioned that he had a relationship with him. Never loved Jefferson, loved Lincoln. Now, for Frederick Douglass, that's him. You know where he is? Tuskegee. So picture this. Booker T. Washington looked up to one man more than anybody else, and it was Frederick Douglass. Picture how great it must have been for that 20-something to have Frederick Douglass come visit the school and give him his blessing. It's probably beyond belief in many respects. So as I tell you about Booker T. Washington and what he got to get to Tuskegee, I'm giving you the short course because I still want you to read the book. But I do want to give you an idea about Teddy Roosevelt, because I know a lot of you sitting there saying, Brian, it's a huge stretch to compare the two. I get it. Slavery, that's beyond hard to get through. I'm not comparing them directly. But if Teddy Roosevelt had money, the one thing he didn't have was health. The kid grew up, he had bad asthma. His parents described, and I talked to his great-grandson who helped me with the book, he's now 80, who knew Teddy Roosevelt's wife. She lived much past him into the, I think, 1959. And one thing he had is that asthma. And when you have asthma as a kid back then, you could do nothing. You just sit and watch your kid maybe choke to death. They had this great idea. Give him whiskey and blow cigar smoke in his face. I'd get a new medical book if that was my recommendation. Yeah. So you know what I'm talking about. I thought I was reading a children's book and they were trying to get me to the end, but no, that was true. So he sat there and he basically had trouble leaving the house. And when he did get up, he weighed about 80 pounds. He'd get beat up all the time. He had very few friends. So even though he had money and affluence, he had unbelievable parents, he didn't have the one thing he needed most, a robust life to be able to go outside and play and do things that normal kids do, even though he was surrounded by opportunity. When he would gradually grow out of it, and they went to the Nile, and they went on trips, and he began to lose that asthma, his dad said, you got a great mind, you spend all your free time reading, but you got to build up your body. And he read books, and he found out how to build up his body. His dad goes, I can't believe how robust you are. I'm going to get you weights. And he became the most physical, aggressive president ever. Again, the one message that I don't think I have to tell anyone in this room, but maybe you want to relay to kids, the next generation, is that you could make your weakness your strength if you choose it. And then you become a better person because of it. You going to tell me that Teddy Roosevelt didn't spend the rest of his life sticking up for the little guy because he knows what it was like to be that little frail guy? And then when he goes to college, the first time he's really with other kids, He ends up trying to fit in, finding his group, finding himself, using his great brain to write this definitive book on the naval wars of the War of 1812, talking about his uncles who were kicked out of the country for fighting for the British, and used them as weapons and used them as resources. So Teddy Roosevelt became a guy that became a police chief, looking out for the little guy, going into the tenements filled with Italians, rolling cigars, 6 and 8 years old, finding out what was going on with the cops while they were drinking during the day, not wearing uniforms, setting up an academy, creating an organization. And then when it came to run for office, all he wanted to do was the right thing. No man owns me. He would never do anything except the right thing, which made him totally not palatable to the power structure. So they were fighting him the whole time. Like somebody else I know. It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry about that. Sometimes it happens when you get older to just think about somebody else. So he ends up going to bat for Benjamin Harrison, the president you probably don't remember, stick him in right in between Grover Cleveland's administrations. Benjamin Harrison goes, yeah, I don't have a great job for you, but I want you to clean up the bureaucracy with these government workers. And he went in, and he did. He realized that they needed an incentive. He had to thin the place out, made them responsible, and he understood how to work the bureaucracy. Okay, so he knows law and order. He knows what it's like to stick up for the little guy. He knows what it's like not to be owned, and then he knows what it's like to clean out a bureaucracy. He's getting there. And then he starts making some real waves, makes some real ends, to the point where Grover Cleveland wins back. He's a Democrat. When he wins back the White House, he goes, I'm leaving Teddy Roosevelt. So he left there, stayed another 2 years, came back, and then impressed enough to become Assistant Secretary of the Navy. The war breaks out. He goes, I'm volunteering, becomes an officer or colonel. You know what happened. So he's a military guy. He knows law and order. He knows what it's like to stick up for the little guy. He knows what it's like to have money. They hung out with his family. He knows what it's like not to have money. So he is the perfect guy until he's running for office. He gets that office. He comes home one day to find out his wife and his mom die in the same day. So Teddy Roosevelt, to clear his head, goes out to North Dakota where there were just territories. He's Mr. Rich Guy, is sleeping on the ground, the ruggedness of ranchers, wearing glasses. They look down on him, but he earned their respect. So this guy is building up the perfect resume to lead our country. Comes back, a war hero, becomes governor, and they want to get rid of him because he's getting rid of all the corruption. So they make him vice president. He doesn't want to do the job. He's like, it's a place where careers die. He's in the mountains and finds out McKinley's shot. This horrible human being that's going to be a disruptor is not worthy of the office, is too raw, too much of a self-promoter, becomes president of the United States. Well, one thing he wanted to do was address race in America, and he read Up From Slavery. That's the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. He has his wife read it. He says, we have to meet this guy. So the book that got me excited, that would get you excited, gets Teddy Roosevelt excited. In 1901, they meet in New York City. He goes, look, I'm only the vice president now. I want to be president one day, but let's work together. He goes, you got to come to Tuskegee? He goes, I'd love to. McKinley gets shot. He dies. He writes a letter. I'm not going to be able to make it to Tuskegee. You're not going to believe it. McKinley's dead, and I'm president. He said, why'd you come visit me? So when he comes in, word gets out that Booker T. Washington's there, so Teddy Roosevelt says, come see me. And that creates the visit to the White House. No pictures, just a sketch. Why was it a big deal? Because in the South, they were not ready for a black man, even the most prestigious, famous one of the country, to go to a white man's house at the White House. As despicable as that is, that was America at that time. It created the most hideous headlines, it's all in the book, that you could imagine. And they had no idea it would cause this uproar. In Teddy Roosevelt's mind, this is a great man, self-motivated. He's going to teach me how to take the South and how to make life better. And in Booker T. Washington's mind, the more power I get, doesn't want it for himself, he doesn't want to be rich, the more power I get, the more money for African Americans in the South, the more money for Tuskegee and historically black colleges. They realize everything blew up, we have to keep our relationship low-key. And they did. And guess who one of the key advisors for Teddy Roosevelt for 7.5 years was? Booker T. Washington. So think about that. In a time in which people thought blacks were inferior to whites in the great part of our country, because of a compromise we never should have made, because of an election controversy that never should have happened, they allowed Rutherford B. Hayes to be president, a compromise was cut, and they said, what the South wants for the Republican to become president, pull your troops out of the South and let us run our own shop. And they said, you better, that's fine, but remember, the war's over, Everyone's equal. Remember that. Many people didn't. And a lot of the segregationist Democrats were looking to turn back the clock. And that's the life that the Tuskegee president had to deal with. And instead of saying, woe is me, he said, how do I deal with this and make it better? Not for himself, but for everybody else. He wouldn't take Carnegie's money. He wouldn't take J.P. Morgan's money. He said, if you give me money, it's going right to the school. They said, you got to take a vacation. General Armstrong got a heart attack, wrote him a letter. You work too hard, you're going to end up like me with a heart attack. He goes, all right, I'll take a vacation. So he takes a 2-week vacation, goes to Europe, finds out they want him to speak the whole time. He comes back, he's a global phenomenon, but he's not just setting up things to Tuskegee, he's setting up these schools along with the founder of Sears, Rosenwald schools. So he's training a whole generation. I don't know what it's like to make that type of an impact on America. I don't know why he doesn't have his base on the side of a mountain, but if you ask Teddy Roosevelt, he'd put it there because he served on his board. He was in awe of what he saw. He had a speech all made to give the commencement address to Tuskegee. He basically he was so excited to see what he was seeing. He basically destroyed the whole speech and just winged it. But the speech is still written. It's in Booker T. Washington's book. His goal was just make a maximum impact. It started with McKinley, and then Teddy Roosevelt knocked it out of the park. But it was all about, my last point is, it was all about the best thing for the country and the people. When Teddy Roosevelt decides to come back and run against Taft, he said, hey, Booker, it's your buddy Teddy. I need your endorsement. You know what he said? Can't do it. Because if you lose, it's going to hurt my school. And he said, I understand. And when Booker T, when Teddy Roosevelt had to make some decisions and ignore Booker T. Washington's best advice, which he should have gone to, he's like, I understand, you're the president. Doesn't mean it's going to hurt a relationship. It's what's better for the country. So a few quotes that I think define it, and I want you guys to answer some questions. I can go on for hours because I'm so passionate about this, especially when I'm looking at an audience that cares even more than me. Some things about Booker T. Washington. This is a fact. With few exceptions, the Negro youth must work harder and perform his task better than a white youth in order to secure recognition. Out of the hard work, though, and the unusual struggle through which he's compelled to pass, he gets a strength and a confidence that one misses, whose pathway is comparatively smooth by reason of birth and race. Look, you know what life that he was living. You guys have all read the stories or know these situations. He's like, by making my path so much harder, I'm going to be so much greater. You could get in my way, but it's not going to stop me, and nobody's going to be more appreciative and more steeled for success when I get through it. That's the philosophy he told his students, his kids, his wives. He had 3 of them. He had tragedy nonstop. So what they thought of each other, I think, is important too. Booker T on Teddy. There is no man who has been in the presidency since Lincoln who has been so deeply interested in the permanent and sensible elevation of our race. Look, Teddy Roosevelt says some things that showed he definitely had some blind spots, and even his family would tell you that. But he was a person of his times. You can't judge people by the times we live in. You got to just judge them by what they lived in, because no one can live up to that. The last perfect person we nailed to a cross. So we should be able to study our history and feel heartened by the fact that they weren't perfect and they were a person of their times. I hate to tell you, Barack Obama in 2008 said marriage is between a man and a woman. End of story. And then in 2012, he said same-sex marriage is part of it and is generally accepted in America, whatever you think. Was Barack Obama a terrible person in 2008? Or is he a person of his times? And that's how I look at it. I hope you guys understand that, because I don't see this as the crowd to take down statues, because I think it really destroys the country in a way I've never felt so disturbed. Thankfully, I think we're through it. And this final quote, Teddy on Booker T. It's not hyperbole to say that Booker T. Washington was a great American for 20 years before his death. He has been the most useful as well as most distinguished member of his race in the world, and one of the most useful as well as one of the most distinguished American citizens of any race. I mean, this is the mutual respect at a time in which that wasn't happening. And a lot of people say, how much did they do together? They did a lot. But I also look as role models. How many people, how many kids were raising how many parents were raising their family and going, yeah, there's no difference between the races. Look at Booker T and Teddy Roosevelt. Look at how many appearances they have. Look at the way they talk about each other. Look at the way they write about each other. And how many people's lives were changed, their perceptions were fixed forever because of these two guys who decided to leap over their times and say, make things better. But other thing to keep in mind, too, is they both had to be practical. They say America can only move so fast. That's what they learned from the White House dinner. We got to move in a way that isn't so disruptive that we turn people uncomfortable, which turns things with burning crosses and schools going on fire. And he had to watch that. That's why W.E.B. Du Bois and others said, Booker T, you're too compromising. You're too understanding. It's not right that America's not equal, that people treat people differently. And he says, I'm dealing with the America I'm in, and I know where I want it to go. I want to help. And W.E.B. Du Bois, in many respects, was never a slave, did not experience what he experienced. He had a great education, unbelievable mind, founder of the NAACP. He should be looked at, but the debate can go on, and it's worthy of discussion to infinitum. But you can give me Booker T. Washington, because he said did what was practical, and he did what was possible, while always staying positive and inspiring millions of people by not cashing in, but only trying to help out. Raising teachers, being an example, and indefatigable in raising money for his school, not for his wallet. I just don't think he gets enough attention. And this makes me feel terrible. Both these men did this before they were 60, and they died. And think about what they could have done if they lived to 80. How much better off America would be. And when people look at this country and say, wow, look, what divided we are, I'll give you divided. Oh, race relations, I wish they could be better. Yeah, I always want everything to be perfect. But look at the progress we've made. And, sadly, we could make more. But I think with anybody who keeps their eye on the country, I think as that philosophy, we'll do it. The most successful multicultural country in the history of the world, and we're still the envy of the world. That's why they're breaking our border to get in, and we'll do everything to stay. So thank you so much for the time. At this point, John, you want to come up and we'll take some questions? I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian. That was incredible. We'll ask you a couple questions here, then we'll turn it over to the audience. So I'm joined by my colleague, Ashley Kondracki, because she is a Brian Kilmeade super fan.
But you also did a heck of a thesis.
I wrote my thesis on Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, so
that's right.
It's a double whammy.
Yeah, what am I doing here? So I'm actually going to let Ashley ask the first question.
Yeah, so Brian, I'm glad you brought up at the end there about W.E.B. Du Bois. He was phenomenally educated, a phenomenal leader, but Booker T. Washington offers a really unique perspective because he, in his life, was a slave, a freedman working, and an outstanding leading citizen. So he offers a very unique perspective. And with that, I think because of that, we should take his philosophy and his principles very seriously. And obviously, his main tenet was merit. We're not going to cure the poor race relations by anything other than merit. We need to prove that we are, Black citizens need to prove that they are just as dignified as white Americans, because white Americans at that time in the post-Reconstruction South, they didn't believe that. So he said, okay, we need to prove it as a race. And so with that kind of background, you look at today and you have things like DEI and affirmative action. Those, I dare say, would be Booker T. Washington's worst nightmare. And so my question for you, Brian, is, and you're right, you said we have made so much progress in race relations in the U.S., but in your opinion, is there a future in the United States where we don't have DEI, we don't have affirmative action, and it's taken away, but it's not perceived as an act of hate or a racist act to take those things back? Or are we stuck with them, and do we have to find a way forward?
Well, we got one way to get rid of affirmative action. I think we basically have done it.
Yeah, that's true.
My hope is, do you remember when all those celebrities got caught making believe they had athletic scholarships they didn't belong? The Desperate Housewives woman and everything? I remember I saw this one black student, they went on campus and say, how do you feel about this? One black student saying, now you know how it feels. Because most people looked on campus and saw celebrities and go, the only reason you're here is legacy. And most people look at us and say, the only reason you're here is because of affirmative action. And this guy says, I had a 99.9 average. I was 4 in my class, and people think I got here because of affirmative action. And I said, wow, that's jarring. Because no one was inviting me to an Ivy League school. So I would not even know what that is. My hope is that the playing field is level enough where where you don't need any of those things. And my hope is there'll be some type of governing philosophy where after 10 years, if we find out that there's a problem to address, but I do believe most people I talk to, and there really should be African-American students on the stage with us, but most people I talk to, and if it's a soccer player, I'll add this, I was known as the American on my team. I was one of 3 Americans. No one from America was playing soccer in the 70s. So I just knew the Somali kid was most likely fast. The Greek kid was most likely a great defender. So I never felt like I was seeing color ever. Most valuable player on our Fox and Friends team is the floor manager. He's black. I don't look at him as a black guy. I just look at him as a great field general. I mean, he's in charge. I hope we're getting to that spot, but I don't want to answer for African Americans in the audience who might say, Brian, you don't know. So I'm not going to say from my perspective, the people I am with, nobody sees color, and I believe we're all Americans. I would love to do a reversal on the hyphens. I'd love to be American Italians, American Irish, American Africans. So it's the heritage, but it's always American first. I find that like we're going out of our way to keep saying, oh, you're this, you're Puerto Rican, you're this, Hispanic. Guys, can we be Americans for a while? So I don't like to speak for everyone. I just know the people that I'm involved with go out of their way. But if the people of the African American community feel as though I'm wrong on that, let's talk about it and figure out a way to do it. Because I know people. You know, I was with I don't mean to drop names, but Master P. So Percy Miller, he's basically a billionaire, self-made. His story is unbelievably inspirational. And he goes, he has cereal in stores, and they're not putting his cereal up front. But it's not because I'm black, it's because I wouldn't go with General Mills. And he's like, so I'm telling him, Snoop Dogg and all these other rappers have cereal. And he goes, everyone's telling me, oh, it's because you're black. He goes, no, I just wouldn't go with the big guys. I want to be the big guy. He goes, when I go to meet with other CEOs that are billionaires, I'm the only black guy in there. But all they want to do is help. They're like, how can I help? They're not saying, close the door behind you. And this is him telling me off mic, off television. Like, okay. I go, what drove you? He goes, my parents only emphasize education. Now he's got his son going to University of Houston, full ride, top 5 player in the country in high school. But he goes, all I'm talking about is 101 average in school. They know it's studying first. First thing I asked the coach, I want my kid to say he's going to make his own decision, whether he's going to stay in school, but he knows he's getting a degree. But he also has NIL money, which means $1.1 million he got in 11th grade. So things have changed a little. But in talking to him, he gives me a great perspective. He has no patience for people that want to work, but he goes back to schools to inspire kids. He goes back to his grammar school. He sponsors classrooms, bought classrooms and auxiliary units. He updated gyms. They bought computer units. He went to a senior center and doubled the size of the senior center. He also got shuttle buses because they were too nervous to get on buses to go into this bad section of New Orleans. So he gave me an idea, was out there, and he says to me, I've never in my life met more white people that want to help. So I think that's most people felt really bad about George Floyd. They weren't angry, like, oh my goodness, how do we fix this? And the question is, was it an overreaction to pointing out things in our country that weren't nearly as bad as being portrayed, but it was one of these things after a horrendous incident that maybe got blown out of proportion.
Brian, let's move to education. So one of my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quotes is that the average citizen must be a good citizen if our republic is going to succeed. I think that really gets to the heart of education. And if you look at, Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, it was their education that was their path to kind of freedom and success in life. And, I think as I look at our contemporary culture, I think education is really at the heart of a lot of the problems. And maybe that's because we're not doing as much storytelling. And what I really love about your books is that you're not just talking about the abstract principles, you're telling stories that no one's ever heard of. And when you tell those stories, I think it changes their perception of, what America is and what it can be. So what do you think the role of storytelling is in perhaps, educating the next generation?
Here's the thing. I don't want to talk about Democrats or Republicans. I think the next candidate, I think we're too dug in with these two candidates, and we know whatever they stand for. But I love the next candidate to talk about education, but not conservative or liberal, just American history, taught in a way, warts and all, because I watch Roots. When people say, Brian, you had a rose-colored glasses on your upbringing, anyone see Roots? 1976, the #1 miniseries ever. It was brutal. And Alex Haley put it out and went out there. I remember no one ever whitewashed it in my school, and a middle-class neighborhood in Massapequa, New York. We learned about it. No one whitewashed it, but I would love to get a fundamental. I know people don't want national education. I know people get worried about that, libertarians, conservatives, but I would like some fundamental principles about our past and about history and the classics that we all have to get through. And then this way we can level the playing field with level knowledge. And they won't be saying, well, the SATs aren't fair. Well, they are fair. If you have the fundamentals, maybe up to 6th or 7th grade, I'd love to see people hitting their standardized marks. But most of all, the best thing is, I like to know what that curriculum looks like. My daughter just graduated, is going for a master's in education. She has already taught me more about education, the science behind it, what went into it, than I would ever know. Then I'm talking to people about school choice, and they're telling me what that means. Well, I would love people to get that $7,500 that you get to go to your public school to go to your local school. And then that'll make everything better, because this thing called American competition, we got to get better. I don't want kids going down the block to St. Mary's, but we got to get better. The other thing I learned too is St. Mary's many times doesn't want everybody. They want their school to be elite. They want standardized tests. So if you show up with your $7,500 from it blows up their school. They're not able to handle it. So there's got to be more private schools in some of these smaller towns. But I think competition could do it. But I'd love to hear people talk about education, but what it looks like. Don't just get better educated. What does that mean? You know, I used to think the controversy thing was new math, remember? Oh, they're doing math different. I can't even help my 4th grader with their homework. Those are the good old days. Now I talk to people and say, we haven't learned, I'm in 7th grade, I haven't learned history. I really haven't taken an American history class until 7th. Really? How could that be? And then when people say I don't love social studies or history, I just say, do you like stories? Yes. You like true stories? Yes. You like stories about your country? Yes. I got all 3. Really happened. Explain it. And then there's we have for every one of my books is a 45-minute documentary with it. There's so much stuff on YouTube now to give people a quick course about what happened to the revolution. Once you have the foundation of what happened, then you can talk about, work on some of the nuances of where the battles took place, what the turning point was, who some of the personalities were. But some people don't know who was in the Revolutionary War. Some politicians didn't know who was on whose side in World War II. That's not because people are dumb. It's because that's just left out of their education.
So Brian, probably last question before we turn into audience Q&A. On the note of education, ISI's tagline is ISI, Educating for Liberty. And as we were talking before, it's a great tagline for a topic like tonight because, Booker T. Washington, he really was about educating for liberty, liberty in its fullest sense. And so bringing up what you brought up, what is a good education according to you? You were saying, let's talk about it. So what is it for you?
It's the core courses, but I love an education that gets you thinking, because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And when when people feel like they shut the door on what they have to learn, they haven't been enthused or excited about all the opportunities are out there. And the more I learn about this stuff, like I walked into your library today, I looked at that and I go, I got to read all those books. Because I just want to learn so much about it, because there's so much I don't know. And I think that we should pay our teachers more. They got to be performers. I say the same thing when people go to church. I'm like, well, church is a little boring. And all of a sudden you get this unbelievable priest that puts on a show. And I'm like, I could tell you what the first and second and third reading were, because this guy just nailed it. And if you're passionate about teaching, make it rewarding, but they don't have to get another part-time job. In New York, they pay enough, but most people don't get paid enough. That's why the jobs are wide open. I'd love to get more money into them. I'm one of these people, I'm pro-teacher. Too much money into administration. I think you can look at the budgets and how it's distributed. But for the people that grind it out every day from 9 to 3 in the morning, that have to worry about the kids that don't have clothes, they take money out of their pocket for the bulletin boards. And education would be, I would love to talk to the superintendents and keep the freedom there to train the superintendents to have some criteria to teach your teachers And I would love to build an incentive into that great fourth grade teacher. What they do is they take these great teachers and they rise them up to the point where they're not teaching anymore. And I'm like, my goodness, you just took your center forward and told them to stop scoring. You know, you made him the assistant coach. So I would love for those teachers to stay where they're at. I would like this. If I was going to run for president or senator, I would sit down with some of the leading educators who disagreed, and I'd hash it out, and I'd come up with an education philosophy on how to move us forward, because that's one thing the Chinese have above us. It's the education. They hate their teachers. They hate their country. There's no freedom. There's no ability to move. There's not much innovation. But, man, do they work hard? Do they have their fundamentals down? So I'd love to get that. I'd love to incentivize teachers. I would love to give them raises and if there was a way to judge them. Because I don't want teachers getting rid of kids that are slow or challenging because it brings down their GPA. But I think it's got to be addressed. I know George W. Bush talked about being the education president. But, man, now it's an emergency.
I think we have some time for audience questions. So got a gentleman right there. We'll be bringing the microphones to you. So hold on one second.
His voice transcends.
Yeah, all right.
Brandon Bryce. First of all, this is such an important conversation. Brian, I got a question. Why do you think that in black and brown communities, education is not seen as the civil rights issue of our time? And the second part of that is, can you talk about Booker T was a huge fan of the trade school initiative. Why aren't we seeing more trade schools as an alternative to the failing schools in America?
Okay. On the trade schools, good news, they're up. Enrollment is up 22% over the last 5 years. Not only that, it's paying a lot, paying good, and $94,000 for Tufts University? Are you kidding me? Tufts, you know, what could possibly be worth $94,000 to a 19-year-old? It's out of control. But Teddy Roosevelt was both, right? You cannot graduate without knowing a trade. So whether it was architecture, whether it was farming, you could not graduate without learning a trade. You have to be indispensable. I wish it was pushed in my school. I took one woodshop class and I still got my same napkin holder. I don't need it. You guys want it? But I love to see that in schools. I didn't take metal shop. I took home economics because I used to like to explode the cakes by putting too much baking powder in. But I would love to see it. And this is the problem is our parents. I remember, like, when you hang out at graduation, these parents don't want to say, my son is going to be a mechanic. Parents don't want to say, yeah, my son is, you know, he's going to be working in a metal shop. They don't want to do it. I think people have to change the parents' perception of what a success is for kids. Yeah, my kid's going to welding school at a graduation party for 18-year-olds. Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, or thinking it, say, that's awesome. There's a need for that. You know, we're trying to build ships. We can't get people to work on it. So I would think we got to change the perception of it, and that could be done through ads. Same thing with the Army. People, oh, why don't people join the military? Have you seen anything except Wounded Warrior and Tunnel to Towers? Great organizations, but the perception for the 15-year-old is everyone loses a limb and loses their mind. Yeah. So where are we going to go? Where are we going to see the people talking about I was 20 years old and I had no direction. I went in the Army and I came back and I had a family. I learned what courage and discipline was. And now I went to Columbia University and I've had a chance to start my business career. The CEO of Anheuser-Busch was a Navy SEAL, was telling me, you know, I didn't know what I was going to do. I went into the military, came out, used that discipline. Now he's the CEO of Anheuser-Busch. And it wasn't his idea to put Dylan Mulvaney on that beer can. But I would love to see the perceptions, right? Couldn't we see some commercials and perceptions? Can't you combine with corporate America to do just that? The other thing is, I keep hearing we need welders and we need this. Can we get some sponsors from these companies to scholarship them in? So a lot of people, when they graduate, come from the inner city. It costs $5,000 to go, $10,000. Mom and dad, or just mom, is not there to write the check. You want a welder. Why don't you pay for it? Why don't you say, I got a scholarship, I'm going to welding school. It's going to take me 2 years, but now I'm going to be making $120,000 by the time I'm 25. And that's a fact. And why do I talk like this? Because Mike Rowe comes on every month, and he drills it into me. And I think that would be good. About the education, Barack Obama, I remember saying the same thing. And I remember he said, I forgot the name of his group. He had a foundation they started when he was in, and he said to the East Room, he said, we have to stop ridiculing kids that are carrying books in the black community and don't think school is cool or afraid to get good grades because it won't be accepted. That was the first time I heard that. And that's the President of the United States. By the way, Barack Obama's got a tremendous life story. I wish he would tell it. His book was a bestseller because it was inspirational, and he should be talking about that all the time until you want to go, okay, enough. But that's what people need to know. Single parent family, studying around the clock, mom helping you with the homework, grandparents chipping in, finding a way to get him to college, using his basketball ability to get people's attention, obviously a huge intellect. Nobody doubts his political skills, his ability to speak. I don't care if you agree with anything he said. He is an inspiration to many people. You can become president. That's a reality. I want to hear more about that. But I can't change that. I'm fascinated by that. Paul Ryan said the same thing and was called insensitive. But he said in the black community, I'm finding that people don't really want to tell people that they do well in school. And I'm thinking, can't we change that? Couldn't that come from parents?
Other questions here in the front row. Chris, we've got a microphone coming for you. Well, for the recording, we're on C-SPAN here.
So I read the book, and it's one of my most favorite books, but another point came up. In the company that I own, I'm in the back sometimes when deliveries come in, and a lot of these guys that are driving the trucks are from these foreign countries, and they are all black. Women are black. And I talk to them, and I sit there for a half hour and 40 minutes, and I ask them, how do they succeed here? What do they think of America? They are 100% so excited about the opportunity to be in America because we're the melting pot, and people traditionally look at the soul and the integrity of the person, and these people are succeeding to the point where the one gentleman had 6 kids. He brings them back to the Caribbean every year so he can see and show his kids what is not right, bring them here and show them what is right. So I think education is extremely important, but it's also the understanding that how these people can succeed and not accept any excuses like Booker T. Washington. I'm going to succeed no matter what. And I think it's instilled in a lot of our communities today that you make excuses for yourself instead of taking personal responsibility. And that's what I love about Booker T. Washington.
Chris, I don't even think that's a black-white thing. I think there's a lot. I saw Dana White the other day, said this whole generation's soft. That's the bad news. The good news is if you're not, you're going to exceed quickly. So, they say the whole thing about hard times make hard people, soft times make soft people. It's not their fault they're born at this time when we're not really at a war that's taxing more than 2% of the country. We still excel, our economy excels, our debt's out of control, but still, everywhere you look, America's already coming back. If we just do the simple, basic things, we would be so much further, like control our border, support our police officers, just basic things. But we're still better on our worst day than any other country. And for those people chanting death to America, I recommend one thing, travel. And if you find someplace better, stay. And watch, if you...
So Brian has to get up at 2 in the morning for his show tomorrow. So we have time for one more question. Anyone? Okay, we've got a hand right there.
But can I just say one precursor? I appreciate the questions, but I don't think I have all the answers. I'm just giving you, so I hope I'm not insulting people because you have an area of expertise, your life experience is different than mine. I'm a guy that's just written these books, spent years studying it. Every day I'm knee deep in the news. I'm minimum reading 4 or 5 hours a day for the last 26 years. So that's all, but I don't know everything. You guys are asking my opinion, but I don't want you walking out of there thinking, Brian Kilmeade's giving me the philosophy of life, education, race relations. I don't. I'm just giving my opinion, and what I think I do best is I ask questions of people smarter than me. So, and this is where I'm able to accrue, and my kids think I'm cool. But
all right. Last question right here.
Thank you. You mentioned that you were hoping that a future president would take a position
to really support education in this country. It reminds me of when I was in high school, John Kennedy. He brought the whole country to the point of massive exercising.
I heard that, yeah.
Running.
Saw that.
And speed reading. So you could read 3 or 4 books a day. So, but the problem we see today is we can't seem to motivate the populace, even in Delaware, to take an interest in education. We have a school board election coming up in May. Our historic turnout is below 5%, and I would venture to say that most people in this room could not even tell us the date of that election in May. What beyond is having a president enough, or is there anything else in society that we can do to get the population motivated?
Well, I thought Virginia did that.
Thank you.
Didn't Virginia do that and kind of get everybody excited 6 months or a year ago and get Glenn Youngkin in office by pointing out the pandemic did it too? The other thing, sir, that's playing a major role is the attention span is shot because everyone's on TikTok and Instagram, and to sit down and read a book is a real rarity, and I don't blame them for this. And I don't even blame us. We don't even know what we're getting into. We don't even know what's next. So, and we were talking before, Rich, right? Like, you were there for the internet, the birth of the internet overseas, and what could email do for your company, right? Can you imagine that conversation? I think email can make your company better. We would laugh if I was a consultant that came in the office that way. But look at how things are changing. So I think we're hopefully going to get a reset soon because the water gradually got hotter. They didn't all of a sudden hand us this Apple phone. They gradually made it more and more. The BlackBerry was the crackberry. Right? But nobody was watching video on the BlackBerry because it was, it was jumpy. This will never work. Now I'm watching, people don't even put on the TV when they walk in the house. So some of it is really not our fault and it's not their fault. Everything just got, the advertisers come in, people want to make more money. How do we get more eyes? Let's do this thing called algorithms. Let's suck them in. Next thing you know, people are 15, 20 years old. They've never read a book. So I think we have to reset. Parents got to reset. I'm seeing this huge trend in this country. For 15, don't get social media until you're 15. Don't bring phones in schools. Keep everybody off. Ainsley, my fantastic co-host, in her school, they had to sign a letter saying you have to keep your kids off Instagram or you're kicked out. Not Instagram, all social media. Until they're 15. You know what the parents said? As long as everyone's off it, I'm fine with that. But I don't need to hear I'm the only parent stopping my kid from doing this. So I think we're getting a hold of it a little. We might have lost between the pandemic and all the other challenges, and to people told stay home, don't go to school, Zoom, and don't work out, don't go anywhere without a mask. I don't want to relive that. But we can recalibrate and get control. All these little things matter. All the little things matter. And I think it would be great if you ask me about education, the way you get the parent-teachers, when the parent-teachers meetings happen, and most people, when they do show up, that's the moment to say, I need you to vote. And you turn around and go, these are the 7 people that are going for the 4 seats, and this is what I need you to show up. And that conversation you have, the teachers need to be briefed by the PTA, how important it is for them to show up, and I think that we could get more hands-on opportunity. I never really knew about it. That wasn't really a problem in our town. But now people in my town that I grew up in, people are saying, oh, there's a huge problem with the philosophy, with their teaching, what they're not teaching.
We've got, I guess, one more very quick question right up here.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll just hold on for the microphone.
Oh.
Yep.
So my question is between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, because what happened is they were contemporaries, but Du Bois was taken as more serious or whatever, and he, in his view of education, et cetera, was accepted over Booker T. Washington. Can you speak to why that might have happened?
Well, all I can tell you is he didn't set up a series of schools like Booker T. Washington did. And right, Booker T. Washington set up a legacy of schools, fundamentals in poor, underserved areas, along with Julius Rosenwald, of the founder of Sears. They set up these schools that not only, when I went to Tuskegee to do the special, the guy that I interviewed was from Niger. And he said, I go, how did you get here? He said, it was my dream of going to teaching at Tuskegee since I was at a Rosenwald school in Africa. I'm like, my goodness, this guy affected almost every continent. So W.E.B. Du Bois is an unbelievable intellectual. I believe the first African-American PhD. I read his books. I read his biography when he was in his 70s. He wrote it, so he outlived Booker T. Washington by 25 years. So he had a different life experience, but I think the legacy is much stronger for Booker T. Washington because he lived in an area that was the most challenging and found a practical way to excel and had other people excel. Where I think that W.E. Du Bois, as impressive as he was, could not have had the life experience that Booker T. had, or lived in the South like he had, and thrived like he had. Thankfully for him, he didn't have to live a life of born into slavery and struggle so much for an education. And he did have an incredible mom that was extremely hands-on, as Booker T. Washington seems to have had too. But they have different philosophies, but different ways to get to the same place. I would have loved to have seen what happened if W.E.B. Du Bois had accepted the opportunity that Booker T. gave him when he was just getting out of college to teach at Tuskegee. And next thing you know, if you read W.E.B. Du Bois' letter after Booker T. Washington passed, the beginning is good and the end, he just rips him, even in his epitaph. So they didn't believe both philosophies can exist. They thought Booker T. Washington was way too tolerant and understanding. And I understand both schools of thought, but it's so much different to live in the eye of the storm and try to make it better as opposed to stand on the outside and judge.
On that note, please give Brian another round of applause.
Thank you very much.
And then thanks again to Ray Geese and Stratus Aviation with Fly Advance for making tonight possible.